Over these last days, it's been reminded of something that's been said over the years, and that is that we have to know who we are and to know what we do. But since knowing who we are and what we do is beyond the mind, how do we know? There's a little story that comes to mind. And that's that story about the couple who had a son. And for the father, he was very disappointed in his son. He considered him a sissy, a wuss, a dreamer, and he would often tell him so. Then one day, it was the father's birthday, and the mother had cooked a special dinner and asked her son, giving him a basket, to go out in the field and gather flowers to adorn the table for the birthday dinner. Well, the father came home, the dinner was ready and getting cold, and there was no sign of the small boy. When he finally came home, the father was furious, scolding him, sending him to his room, saying, "No dinner for you." And then he followed his son into his room and continued the scolding and berating. Well, the mother came in and put her hand on her husband's arm to cease his tirade and said, "Why don't you ask him why?" And so, in the silence and in between his tears, the small boy said, "Well, I went out into the field and I saw all the flowers looking up at the sky and waving in love and devotion, and I did not dare to stop them. And then I looked and looked until I finally found some that had finished their praying." The tears were streaming down the father's face as he gathered up his small son with the realization that came to him. Then there's a story about Maimonides, probably better known to us as Hermes. And we know that Maimonides, or Hermes, was a great physician, scholar, and philosopher. He was revered by the Catholics and the Muslims who resided in Cordoba at that time. But amongst them was a certain caliph who particularly found Hermes to be a great counselor and confidant. But of course, there were many that were jealous of Hermes' relationship with this caliph. One in particular, a courtier who was very vicious and tried at every opportunity to bring Hermes down. And there was an occasion when this courtier went to the caliph and said, "A great monarch, Hermes has confessed to me that he finds your breath offensive, putrid." Well, the caliph was very, very angry and called for Hermes to be in his presence. But in between times, the courtier went to Hermes and said, "The Caliph has confided in me that he finds your breath putrid and offensive." So of course, when Hermes went in to the Caliph's presence, he covered his mouth and his nose with a cloth so as not to cause offense to the monarch. Well, seeing this, of course, the Caliph was doubly angry. And he said, "Well, finally that courtier is telling the truth." And so after he'd sent Hermes away, the Caliph personally went down to the place where there was a great kiln, a great oven, furnace, where they melted the metal to make the weapons of war. And he told those who attended the furnace that the person who comes to them and says, "Have you obeyed the Caliph's orders?" you should throw them in the furnace. And then he went back and called Hermes to him and told him to go to where they made the weapons and ask those who attended the furnace this question. But on the way down the road to fulfill this task, a woman recognized the great physician and approached him and begged him to come and attend to her daughter who was deathly ill. And so Hermes took the time to go with the woman and tend to her ailing daughter. And then he went to fulfill his task, and he asked those attending the furnace, "Have you completed that which the Caliph asked you to do?" "Why, yes," they said, "here's the ring of the person we threw in the furnace." And so taking the ring, Hermes went back to the Caliph, who was greatly surprised to see him. "What are you doing here? Didn't you ask the question that I told you to ask?" Hermes said, "Yes." And the attendants confirmed that they had done, and here's the ring of the man that was thrown in the furnace. Well, of course, the Caliph recognized it immediately as that of the courtier who had gone to those who attended and asked that question, "Have you done what the Caliph asked you to do?" And so the Caliph said, "Well, it was supposed to be you who was thrown in that furnace, because you said that my breath was foul." "Oh," said Hermes, "it was the courtier who told me that you had said that my breath was foul." So the Caliph had a great realization. Hermes did not need such confirmation, but to the Caliph it was indeed a great revelation. What is it that arises for you, unbidden, unthinking, as to the deep meaning of these stories? How do we know who we are and what we do when knowing who we are and what we do is beyond our mind? What is it that arises from these two stories for you?
For me, it's the purity of the child and the feelings who are just doing their thing, and all this other stuff happens around them.
Okay.
They don't know what they're doing, they're just doing it.
That's it, isn't it? Simple. Very simple. How do we know that we know?